This vocal atmosphere sounds amazing in this breakdown. Check this out. This is one of the best things you can do for these breakdowns. Breakdowns are vital for creating top quality dance tracks. A bad breakdown can ruin your track and ruin your chances of top DJs playing or downloading your tracks, lower your sales as well as lowers your streams, and if you try it out when you're DJing, it might kill the vibe on the dance floor. I can't tell you how many times I've not purchased a track or played a track live because the breakdown was either too long or it wasn't interesting enough or it just didn't fit the vibe of the rest of the track or it just simply was not good. So these are all things I'm going to cover in this video. I'm going to go through a project and create a deep progressive house breakdown from scratch to show you all the different tips and techniques that you can do to make your breakdowns feel more professional. You'll also be able to download the project files, samples, everything included in the link in the description below. Let's dive in. Here are 3 main reasons why breakdowns are super important and what you should be thinking about in the back of your mind when you're writing your breakdowns. 1, it gives the listener a break from the monotony of the track. Dance music is repetitive and it can be hypnotic. Because it's so repetitive, people can sometimes get a little bit bored and it can feel a bit monotonous even if the track is super interesting. So a breakdown is a great way to break up the monotony of the track and keep it fresh and keep it exciting and interesting. Number 2, it gives the artist time to express themselves artistically with more elements, more ideas. It can really push the storytelling of the track because you don't have to worry about the groove or the danceability of the track in the breakdown so much. This is also a place where you can probably put something a bit more memorable like a vocal or a lead that might not fit over the groove of the track. And number 3 is that it gives a place in the track to create more tension, and tension is extremely important and vital to electronic dance music. It happens all the time within our music. By having tracks that are very repetitive, listeners are usually anticipating that the track is growing, something new is coming in. There's always some level of tension and release. Depending on genres, it can be a lot or it can be a little. Breakdowns offer that section of the track where you can add a ton of tension and release if you want, and then it gives a space for the artist to really push the tension and then release back into the drop with build-ups and new ideas and all of that. For a lot of people, the tension in the breakdown and build-up into the drop is the highlight of the track. A bonus reason is that it gives a DJ an opportunity to let the dance floor kind of breathe a little bit. If your music has no breakdowns, the dance floor can get a little bit bored or they can get a little bit tired by going full on for the whole amount of the song. Gives them a chance to go to the bathroom, to grab drinks at the bar, or just to take a little bit of a break from the dancing so that they don't tire out and they can enjoy more of your set for longer. So now that we know why breakdowns are so important, we're going to look into what makes a good breakdown. So I'm going to dive into 3 topics: the length, the songwriting flow and arrangement of the breakdown, and again, the tension and release. And let's start with the easy one, the length and arrangement. Number 1, length and arrangement. Let's start with an easy one first. The longer a breakdown is, the harder it is to keep it interesting, and a lot of DJs will actually avoid playing tracks with long breakdowns, including myself, because it can kill a dance floor. It can ruin the vibe. It's just sometimes breakdowns are too long, the dance floor gets bored, it's kind of awkward, everyone's just standing around, just not sure really what to do. I usually recommend keeping your breakdowns at 32 bars. It's about a minute of song, and it's pretty typical. Any longer than the 32 bars, it gets a little bit more difficult to try and keep it as interesting and keep the dance floor engaged and keep the listener engaged. Until you're a more experienced producer, and then maybe you can make some really crazy build-ups or make your breakdown super interesting and high quality, aim for about 32 bars or about 1 minute of breakdown. This is the track that I've been working on. I've already labeled out the arrangement of my breakdown. First, I have what's called a cooldown, which I'm going to cover a little bit later in the video. Then I have my breakdown here. From here over to the drop is 32 bars. So you can see if you're unsure how to count your bars, you can just turn on the 1 bar here and you can go, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 16. And then I can double that, and that's another 16, which means 32. The last 8 bars of my break, I have this build, and that's going to be for the build up. So I know when the build up is going to be coming in. And then of course my drop is here. I've deactivated a bunch of clips here that I'm going to bring back in just to save some time, but I'll explain every step as I'm going through. And of course, this is just a guideline. You can do whatever you'd like, but this is just a good starting point. And these markers can change depending on how the track kind of plays out, but it's a rough guideline to get started. For the cooldown, I don't really want to dig into my arrangement. Say I have the arrangement already going pretty well here. I like how it sounds. I want the breakdown here. If I bring the cooldown back here, I'm actually cutting into some of the arrangement of my track already. So I can actually just go into here and right click up here and duplicate time. That's going to duplicate everything over, and then I can move my cooldown over so that it doesn't interfere with the arrangement that I already have. I've already done that, so I'll just delete that, but that's just a tip for you as well. And the last thing I want to do is I want to label 2 turning points is what I call them. And these are parts of the breakdown that you want to bring in something that is going to kind of change the vibe a little bit, or it's just going to be somewhere that you introduce something. It's just like a simple reminder. So after 8 bars, I want to have a turning point. So I'll say turn, and then maybe at the build up will be another turn. So I have it named as build, but I can call this as build/turn. Number 2 is songwriting flow and arrangement. Your breakdown should feel like it flows well from the higher energy and the more full track into the breakdown by slowly removing elements, by either fading them into the background with automation, or by the arrangement slowly dropping elements as you transition into that breakdown. Then when the breakdown has a lot less elements playing, you can introduce new ideas, leads, hooks, vocals, things that are going to push the envelope of the track, the storytelling of the track, make it memorable before building up back into the drop and bringing in all those elements that you had before, with maybe 1 or 2 new ideas to keep that track feeling interesting and professional and moving forward. So first, I want to show you some ways you can bring the energy down step by step in a way that works very well, so we can start to introduce new ideas to build the track back up. We're going to start with the cooldown first. So this section here, I call the cooldown usually 4, 8, or 16 bars, and this one here is 8 bars. I'm going to remove the kick with some automation. Let's take a listen to how it sounds dropping into the breakdown right now. Not very exciting, there's no transitions, it's pretty boring, and it just goes from a high energy to a lower energy, and all we hear is just that pluck playing. The first thing I'm going to do is automate the low end out of the kick drum for the last 8 beats of the cooldown. So here I have my EQ on this filter here, frequency, show automation, and then I'm going to push this up to about 250 area, maybe 237, and we'll see how that sounds now. Next, I can do the same thing with the bass. Maybe EQ some low end out. So I have my EQ filter on, show automation, and I'm just going to bring that up a little bit, pulling the sub frequencies out. It makes for an easier transition because we're pulling out the power slowly rather than all at once. Okay, that sounds good. You'll notice I put this past where it actually ends. That's because my bass has a little bit of release on it. And if I pull this down like this, then we get this weird little kind of pop of bass at the end. It's hard to hear, but there's like a, so you can either move this over like this and that gets rid of it, or you can move this over here. That way there's no bass actually playing, but it's because the EQ is jumping so quickly that it's kind of creating a bit of an artifact here. Let's see if you can hear it. Right here. There you go, hear it. Let me just push like that and it's gone. Okay, so that already sounds better, but there's some more things I want to do with this cooldown to kind of transition from the beginning of the cooldown out. So I'm going to go into the drums here. Maybe I want to pull one of the drums out in the cooldown. So the drums are full on here. Maybe I can just reduce this percussion here. It's adding a little bit of energy to the drum loop. So if I can just grab this one and instead of just cutting it out like this, just by deleting it, I want to make this a little bit more professional. I'm going to automate it out. I'm going to go into my percussion and let's just filter out that percussive sound. Go from here and I'm going to pull this down. Pull this down so it's faster. And And that way it gradually transitions out of the song, it blends into the background, and I don't really notice it consciously. It's more of a subconscious feeling. I'm going to do the same thing with the clave, but instead I'm going to automate just the volume. So I have two elements coming out of the cooldown. It's going to slowly drop their energy just a little bit. So now for the synths, I have a few elements that are pretty bright. I have the ARP, the pads, the sub melody. I want to pull all of those down by adjusting the cutoff of the synths. But inside here, I can pull down the frequency. So I brought down the filtering on all the synths. So the cutoff is cutting all the high end down as it's transitioning into the breakdown. But this is kind of typical. You expect it to kind of drop down onto where the breakdown starts. So I'm going to do something that I call the crossfade method, where I'm going to bring these filters down at different times. And this kind of makes it a little bit more interesting to the ear, because you're not just hearing the whole thing get filtered down at one time, but you're hearing different instruments get filtered down at different times. And your ears might pick up on sounds that you haven't really been paying attention to. And it also adds a little bit of looseness to the grid of where the transition is happening. So with the breakdown at bar 17 is that breakdown, but if I can make it feel like listeners are hearing it go from 15 or 16 or 19, there's still some sounds kind of holding on, it gives a sense of looseness to the track, and it makes it feel not so stuck to the grid, which in turn is more interesting. So for the pad, maybe I'll bring this over here a little bit, and for this one, I'll bring even further the drone. This pad I'll keep down here, and maybe this one I'll bring down here, and this melodic section, let's try that. Now let's play it from here. See how it's kind of hard to tell where the breakdown kind of starts because we don't have any real indicators. And once we have some transitional points, like some effects and stuff, then it's going to be more obvious. But then we still have that kind of loose feeling by bringing in the filtering down at different times. I'm also going to do this with the drums now. So going into the drums, I personally love to have drums in my breakdown because I think it really helps the dance floor not feel so bored. And it helps the breakdown feel more interesting because, again, we can start to filter out those drums at a unique time. So I'm going to turn all these drums back on. So I have the drums here, and I have these percussion sounds here. I'm going to bring those all back in. This is how it sounds. You'll notice how I didn't bring in the top two hats. This is also another point that I want to bring down the energy. So when it transitions into the breakdown, I've cut some of the other instruments just like I did over here with the clave and the percussion. So this actually isn't even in here. I can just get rid of this. So I want to do the same thing for the drums. I want to filter them out and make them feel like they're kind of just off the grid a little bit when it kind of transitions into the breakdown. So I have a filter here on the shaker. I'm going to pull that shaker out a little bit further and maybe filter that down. Kind of like this, add a little bit of a curve here. And then the clap I'll do much quicker. Let's go very quick on the clap. So it fades out quickly. And then I'm going to do on the whole drums a filter. And I'm going to pull this right over, show automation, and subtly bring all of the drums down like this. So that all the percussion stuff, the other elements that I'm not filtering here, they're going to follow that same path of this one. And there's one more thing I want to do, and that's add a reverb onto this. Add a reverb onto the drum group, and the dry wet's going to be at 0, and the decay time can stay pretty quick. The dry wet is going to come up as it's kind of transitioning, and I can do this from the cooldown. So from the cooldown, let's bring this up a little bit, and this can go up to about 40 or 50%, and maybe we'll do a bit of a curve here like this. And the decay time can also be automated as it's getting longer the more dry wet we get. And let's take a listen to this from here. We can even see dry wet here. And that's just going to slowly build the tension into the breakdown from these drums. And then as it's filtering out, it's going to add reverb to this. Maybe the decay time has to be a little bit faster than 800 milliseconds. I'll push this up. There we go. You hear the clap fading out. The rest of the drums fading out. And just a little bit from that shaker still. Maybe I'll bring this up a little bit more so it's a bit more obvious. Again, this just keeps it interesting. It keeps it fresh and unique, and that you don't know exactly what instruments are coming in or out at this point. And this crossover method that I've mentioned is kind of like this idea that whenever something is kind of filtering out or fading out, something is replacing it. Something's coming in while something is going out. I don't know how to how to do this, but that's the idea, that like something is overtaking your ear. There's something, but before you even notice this thing is turned down all the way, something else has come in and been like, hey, what's up? I'm here now. And then you pay attention to that. Your ear catches that new instrument, and then the next one, and then the next one. And that keeps it super interesting because you kind of get lost in the sound. You're not stuck so much to the grid. Next, we want to add some transitions, and this is going to give the listener an idea of when the breakdown actually starts, and it's also very pleasing to the ear. So if I go down here, I have some transitions that I've already done. I have this impact here and this impact. And this is one of the biggest issues I see with my students that I teach, is that they put these really, really cheesy, bad sounding impacts in because they don't really know how to choose different ones. Listen to this transition and see if you can notice why it doesn't really fit well. To be fair, it actually doesn't sound terrible, and it makes the breakdown feel like it's going into more of a breakdown. It helps the rest of that crossover method feel a little bit more interesting. But the simplest thing that I like to do with this to make it not have that big kind of like smacking impact is I go in here and I just remove the initial transient. And this is actually the same sample as this one. I've just gone over here, I've just duplicated it over, and I've reversed it. And I've stretched it out so it's a little bit longer so we get more of a build, and I'll stretch this one out so we get more of a tail end as well, keeping in mind that it does change the sound a little bit, so just be careful how far you stretch it. And then I take off that transient, and listen how much better it sounds without those transients. And then I like to crossfade it like this, that they blend into each other. We get rid of that transient, and it's not going to feel nearly as big. Still sounds like it has a little bit too much low end, so I like to add in an EQ, cut out the lows, and add a reverb to really soften up that sound. And to me, that sounds much more professional, much more organic. You can add a long decay time if you want that to be a really big impact. Blends into the breakdown a little bit better. Bring that decay time a little bit down. Some high cut, bring that up so it's nice and open. Bring the low cut down. We don't need that low information. And now we're going to add in a second impact because that's going to make it sound even more professional. So I'm going to bring in this crash cymbal. And with this crash, I like using the echo instead of the regular delay because it has this reverb setting that you can use, has ping pong mode, and you can also add this nice filtering. So when the delay is happening, it feels like the crash or the sound that you're using it on filters back into the background. So moving on, like I said, I want the breakdown to feel cohesive. So I want to bring in a few elements from before the breakdown into the breakdown. This is going to make it feel not so abrupt, like you're just kind of cutting into a new section. But by bringing in these elements in maybe a lower energy state, like we've done with the filtering, it's going to make it feel like the same vibe, the same song, and it's going to feel cohesive. So here I have the pads. They're quieter, but they're still there. The drums are turned off. I have the ARP, but for the ARP, I've turned down the cutoff. I want to bring in some new elements as well, and now I have a ton of room to do that. Everything's kind of filtered down. Maybe it's time to start bringing things back up slowly and bring in some new elements. So here is the turn. This is where I want to bring in something new. I'm actually going to keep that drum loop going throughout the whole breakdown, and I'm going to pay attention to the filtering. Filtering is here on the drums. I'm going to leave that down for most of it until I get to the build, and then I'm going to bring it up slowly. So let's bring this back down, and let's go back down to our synths here. Before I bring in some new elements, let's just automate the rest of the instruments to bring them back up to the drop to where we started. Let's go like this. Let's bring them all back up to where they were, and let's just curve this down a little bit. You always want things to be changing, so just adding subtle automation like this, it's always changing throughout the whole breakdown. One last thing I want to do for the cooldown is I want to filter out the top end of the bass as well. So I forgot to do that, basically just using a filter to cut out the grittiness of that bass. Another way is to help transition into the breakdown by slowly lowering the energy and back pushing those sounds into the background. Now that I have the cooldown, the transitions, and we're going into the breakdown, I want to add in a new element and automate the sounds that I have in my breakdown to feel more interesting. So I went ahead and with the ARP and I brought the filter up a little bit more into the drop here. So I just went slowly, brought that up like this, and then I drew in with the pencil tool and I just can draw something random here so that we're getting just different all the way through, and it's just opening and closing that cutoff a little bit different all the time so that it's more interesting to the listener. You want to work with what you already have, making it more interesting by doing things with automation on different parameters, but you also want to add in a new element. And this is something that my students struggle with a lot, is adding in an extra element into your breakdown. Some great things to put in your breakdowns for this style of music are vocals, vocal atmospheres, atmospheric sounds, new leads and hooks, and they're actually quite simple to do, so we're going to run through some of these right now. The first one is just going to be a simple sub melody. So I'm going to turn this on here, and all I did for this with a simple sawtooth with some filtering, some EQ, delay, and reverb. Delay and reverb is going to be your best friend with creating these type of atmospheric sounds. The sound itself is not that interesting. Oh, and I also put some LFO onto the cutoff. So without the LFO, very simple sound. With the LFO, very simple sound, delay, and reverb. And I probably want to take out that lower note a little bit too. Maybe a little bit more dry wet. I just want to show you that even simple sounds like this can sound good in a breakdown if you use it as like an atmospheric thing. So I'll play the track with this sub melody and just listen how it adds a lot of value to the track when it's something so simple. Right, just such a simple idea, 4 notes. Very simple to do, and you can use other synths as well for this. Like if I grabbed a Pigments, grabbed any random preset in like the pad or in the lead section, and I'm just gonna try this one. This one works. Let's hear it without all the effects. Throw that reverb and delay back on there, making it atmospheric, and play it along. And play it again. That sounds good. So this is just a perfect example of keeping it simple. Throw a bunch of reverb onto a preset. We can try one more. Sounds good. Sounds pretty good. That one sounds kind of boring. Right, just with a lot of reverb onto this, it just makes it feel atmospheric and usually can help it fit in this style of breakdown. What I like to do is create a bunch of these sounds, duplicate them over, record them, and see which one fits best, and maybe layer them up. But for the project file, I'll keep it as the wavetable so you can play around with it in case you don't have Pigments. Next, I have these atmospheric sounds that I got from a sample pack, and this sample pack is actually my sample pack from my guitar pad sounds. So again, just using the scale, using the notes in the scale of the track that you're using. So I'm using this D, and then I'm pushing it up 1 full octave and 1 semitone because the track is in D sharp. And these already have a lot of reverb on them, but again, adding in my own reverb, and listen how this elevates the track. Again, just a simple atmospheric sound. The same sound, just a different note, a few semitones down. I can do it one more time and bring it down a few more semitones. It's simple. I'm not grabbing new sounds every time. I'm just grabbing this one sample, throwing it in there and changing the pitch of it. I can stretch it out a little bit, make it different lengths. I can reverse it so that it sounds a little bit different, but it's just adding atmosphere to the song and making it feel more interesting. Adding a few of these atmospheres back and forth throughout the track is really going to elevate it. We'll do one more, which is going to be a vocal atmosphere, and then I'm going to show you how you can make your own vocal atmospheres by using your own vocals. This vocal atmosphere sounds amazing in this breakdown. Check this out. This is one of the best things you can do for these breakdowns. It just adds so much texture and depth to the sound. This is pretty full on. Usually I like to leave a little bit of gaps in between and then maybe some delays. So vocal pads like this, you can get from sample packs or you can make your own. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a little bit. Two more things you can add are the hook or like a lead sound, which I already have here, so I'm not going to add in another one, and a vocal. So for your lead sounds, keep it simple. Again, this is a very simple melody with just a bunch of delay on it. But it's just a simple idea that is very easy to remember, easy to sound like repetitive and hypnotic. And then to make this even more interesting, as I'm going into the breakdown, I'm going to duplicate that over and I'm going to increase the octave. So I'll grab the whole sound and just go up one full octave. And then with this one, I'm going to turn it down quite a bit. Maybe I'll open up the filter a little bit more and make it even more of a background sound so that it's layering up with the original, but it's going to come up kind of slowly. So let's actually bring this down like this a little bit. We'll draw in as it comes up and builds up into the track. And that's going to make that lead feel like it's changing by adding in that second layer and make it more interesting. Try and pay attention to these two sounds. That's a pretty big difference, and it actually sounds way more interesting. There's quite a bit going on in the breakdown, I will admit. There is definitely maybe one or two too many layers, but this is just to show you the different ideas that you can put in here, and I would suggest probably taking out one or two layers. So let's just turn off the guitars for now. We'll keep the vocal and we'll keep that new lead because I like how it sounds. Leads are usually pretty hard to create and to write, so as you're learning and you're trying to get better, just keep it really simple. Maybe some plucks with some repetitive ideas, and then experiment with those, so that you don't get frustrated or feel defeated if you can't write a good idea. Simple ideas are usually still really good, so don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel every single track. The last thing I want to add in here is a vocal, and I have two vocals here, but this one is from Splice, and I don't like using everything from Splice because some people might also be using it.
Looking back, I wonder why I didn't show you how deep is my love.
So I found that on Splice, but I wanted to change the pitch of it as well. And when I changed the pitch, it actually didn't sound as good as the original.
Looking back, I wonder why I didn't show you.
Right, like there's some artifacts, it doesn't sound as clean. So I use this AI tool called Automate, which I've covered in a previous video. I'm going to show you how you can use that to create your own vocals from Splice samples that nobody else is going to have, and then creating vocal pads from that for your songs. So this is Automate, which is an AI vocal tool that converts vocals that are already recorded like on Splice, and then you can use the AI to convert them into your own version of that vocal, which they claim renders them as completely royalty free. So you can take any vocal you find on Splice and change it to the vocalists that they have here. This is really cool because you can completely change the key and the voice and the whole timbre and everything. It's almost like you're hiring a vocalist to literally re-sing a part that you have as a recording. You can check out the different vocalists and hear how they sound here.
It never fades away. You stay in.
So basically that singer is going to do a vocal cover of your sample or the vocal that you recorded. Bunch of different vocalists we can choose from. So I'm going to choose Tess because she has dance, pop, singer, club, and house. That sounds perfect for my style of music. Click on Tess, drag and drop the audio in. You can choose the original sample from Splice. Sounds like this.
But looking back, I wonder why I didn't show you how deep is my love.
There's a lot of reverb on there, and it's actually in the key of B, so I'm going to push that up to D sharp here, and then I'm going to change the conversion strength to 100% because I want to just really use Tess's vocal here, and then I'm going to say remove the reverb and echo. And then I click convert. It's going to do its thing. It takes a few seconds. So I'm going to have this new vocal that I can drop in my track. And even if I don't want to use vocals in my track, this is a great way to get some new vocal pads. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's take a listen how it sounds.
But looking back, I wonder why I didn't show you how deep is my love.
It's pretty cool, right? It literally sounds like somebody did a vocal cover of this track and it completely removed the reverb from the sample. So this is also really cool. I can download that, throw that into my track, and let's make a pad out of this vocal. To do this, I'm going to need some reverb. So I'm going to use the stock reverb, but an even better reverb to use would be Shimmer by Valhalla or Supermassive, which is a free one. I'm going to grab a Supermassive and throw that on as well and test that out to see how it sounds. So to make these types of atmospheric pads, we need a lot of reverb. So I'm going to put on this reverb at 100% dry wet. Decay time is really high. The high cut is up, and let's take a listen. So you can hear that it has that really long decay time. You can even try a second reverb. Right, it makes that big blend of sounds. And let's try the Supermassive because it's actually a really cool tool and it's free. Let's try maybe a bigger one. Let's go to echoes. Let's go to reverbs and let's go to large, splashy synth. Hear that big tail? That's what we're going to use to make these pads. So I can actually go in here, audio track, and I'm going to resample track 37. Hit record, and we can just cut this section off here. I'm going to press play and hit record after this section where it's just the wet reverb sound. I also recorded all the vocals here, and this is how it sounds. That also sounds pretty cool, but I'm more interested in this pad right here. And sometimes what I like to do is add in another reverb onto that just to soften it a little bit and add my own reverb tail. And we can now throw this into the track. I'll turn this one off. Maybe we need to add a little bit of fade in here and turn up the volume. Fading in and fading out so it comes in gradually, and let's take a listen. Of course, I can duplicate it over, add a different pitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, semitones up. I am rushing this a little bit, but if you take your time and really find good kind of like vowels like E's and I's and O's and U's that have a lot of this decay on them, like that, you can grab that and make these really beautiful pads. And to push this even further, you can add some automation of filtering and auto pan and volume automation and things, and you can really control these pads and make these really big, lush vocal pads like I made here. Especially when you play more than one note of the vocal, it creates more of a chord because the singer is singing different notes in that scale. And pro tip, it's good to make sure that the vocal you're using is still in the right scale as well as the right key, because just because it's in E minor, it might be in the melodic minor or the harmonic minor, and that could cause the notes to be a little bit different. So if it does sound a little bit weird, maybe it's not in the right scale that you're using, even if it's the right key. And if you want to check out Automate to create your own vocals, click the link in the description below. So if there's any part of your breakdown that feels like it's a little bit boring or repetitive, consider trying one of these atmospheric sounds or like an impact or something to put in the background so that it feels fresh, but don't overdo it like I've kind of done here. That's why I've taken out some of the elements because it was too many. So just dialing back is actually better than having too many elements that kind of overloads the track. We're getting into the last few minutes of the video, but before we do that, I wanted to let you know that my masterclass for creating deep progressive house music like this is now open. You can enroll or join the waiting list for the next masterclass by clicking the link in the description below or this card right up here. It'll be a live group masterclass where you sit with me and we create a track from the very beginning to the very end, mixing, mastering, everything included, and you'll be working along other producers in a group setting. If you miss enrollment for the masterclass, you can still download and watch it after, or you can enroll in the next round for the masterclass by joining the waiting list. So make sure to click that link, join the waiting list to get more information. Or if you prefer just to do one-on-one coaching directly with me, there's also that link in the description below. Number 3 is successfully transitioning back into the drop with tension and release. Tension is so important in dance music, and a lot of producers that are still learning or less experienced usually have problems transitioning from the build-up or the breakdown back into the drop. The energy doesn't match, it feels a little bit awkward, it just doesn't land right. So I'm quickly going to go over some things that you can do to ensure that it feels like that breakdown transitions back into the drop effectively. For the build-up so far, all I have is just some white noise building up, and I have my transitional crashes here, and I will put these same impacts as well. I have the same impacts that are dropping from the build up into the drop. The main things that I want to consider is I want some of the elements from the drop to kind of take place in the breakdown so that it feels like it's cohesive. But obviously we don't want to have things that are too obvious or giving away too much. So let's just bring in a subtle touch of some of the elements that is going to help the transition feel a little bit better. The one thing that I like to do is I like to bring in the drums back in. So maybe the shakers we can bring back in, and maybe that percussion we can bring back in as well. And we don't want to bring them in super obviously. So I'm filtering back in the drums here. And this is because there's going to be so many new elements in the drop. I want to bring them in slowly through the breakdown. So I'm filtering back up the percussion and the shakers. It also helps to build tension. I'm going to do the same thing with the ARP here. But one thing that I like to do is I like to build up until the very end, and then right before the drop, I bring it back down. Because if I bring it up all the way and then drop back into the drop, it loses a lot of energy. So if I slowly bring it back down, then usually the other risers and things take place and it kind of just flows back down. It just kind of transitions back into the lower energy. And I'll do the same thing for the high octave, but I'm going to take that high octave out of the drop just in case I don't want it there. Higher first and then back down, maybe a little bit sooner actually. I've opened all of these filters back up so that they come back with the drop as they were before. And one thing I like to do is have an element that is building up with the build up or from the breakdown, and it plays into the drop a little bit very subtly. So it's pretty quiet. I'm doing that with the vocal. You know, it's very quiet, but it transitions into the drop, and that keeps it so that, again, there's just that cross-fading feeling. Not everything is dropping at once. Things are slowly transitioning from the breakdown into the drop and then fading out. It has to be quiet so that it doesn't feel like the drop is dropping elements out very quickly, but just subtle things like this that kind of help glue it together cohesively. Maybe I'll do the clap on the last ones here. I'll add one more vocal transition here, and then we're going to listen before and after I added all these extra kind of gluing components from the breakdown to the drop. By the way, this is not a full breakdown of how to make a build-up. If you do want me to cover how to make build-ups like I did in this video for breakdowns, then comment below and let me know so that I know that there's interest on doing that video. Listen to the difference between having these two little transitional atmospheres going into the drop. That's without and then with. Just felt like it transitioned much nicer when you have these atmospheric sounds kind of masking over everything else. It doesn't go for every track. Sometimes it's better to increase the tension really high, don't transition with these atmospheres, but just drop into that gritty sound. But this is just an example of one of the things that you can do to ease into the drop if that's the transition that you want. If you want more breakdowns on how to make deep progressive music like this, then click this video right here, or click this video right here, which YouTube thinks you'll like based on your algorithm settings.